Right, so the focus, the objective of this project, this painting, will be a few. There's 4 or 5 objectives, I think. First of all, we want to capture the essence, the character of this pretty Mexican street. This is San Miguel del Allende. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly. San Miguel, very popular touristy town, sort of in central Mexico. But we want to try and capture the colors of Mexico, these sort of earthy, warm ochre colors, trying to capture that character. Next focus will be on the values. We've got a bright sunny day here. The sunlight's coming from the right, casting dark shadows. We've got lots of lights and darks on the scene, particularly dark underneath that bridge there, probably quite dark in there, dark also in the recesses of some of these open doorways. So values. Next, perspective. How are you with perspective? Look at those angles. All right. Top of the building, particularly on the left-hand side here. Top of the building, bottom of the building, and then in between all of these quite attractive, repeated, angular shadow shapes, subtly changing in perspective. I'll get a pencil. So look at that angle there. Think of that angle as something off the vertical or the horizontal. All right. And then that one there, probably the eye line is going to be something. I'm trying to think now. It could be something around there, maybe. All right. So that might be the eye line. But then as we go up, we're going to get steeper and steeper as we go. So yeah, that's probably the horizon, somewhere like that. A little bit easier on the right-hand side. Next, so perspective. Next, things to change in this scene. On the last patch chat, I mentioned our regular monthly online get-togethers. I mentioned some things that might change. So this church tower, lovely church tower, I think is conflicting with the corner of the building. I'm going to just take the liberty of moving that a little bit over to the right and keep it simple. There's lots of, the more you look at this tower, it is in the background. We want to keep it simple, but just create that shape of that church tower there. Again, just emphasizing the character of this Mexican city. This pole here doesn't do anything for me, nor does this one here. So I'm going to leave that out. Some of the detail on the building, simplify that as well. Over on the right-hand side, we've got a lovely lamp silhouetted against the sky. I'm going to keep that in. Also, this cable here, I think it's quite nice the way it loops down, curves down, and then comes back up again to the top of this pole. And a little bit of light, as I say, the light coming from the right-hand side. Maybe these buildings on this right-hand side, they're a little bit lower than the ones on the right, catching a bit of light there against the darker background. Looks like there's a bit of an angular shadow there. That's the edge of a shadow there. So lighter there, darker here. Miss out the bus. I think that's a bus coming down the street. So we'll miss out that bus there. Figures. I'm not going to copy these figures exactly, but I do like this guy here lurking on that left-hand side of the shadow, and he's kind of connected to the shadow quite well. If we imagine the bus not there, then some other figures closer towards the right-hand side, a mixture of figures in there with the tops of their figures silhouetted against a lighter background. Also, other little details, these drainage pipes coming out from, I think a lot of these buildings are flat roofs and they've got these little drainage pipes coming out from the building. And then I guess when it rains heavily, the water just flows down they're quite sort of characteristic of the area. Right, so that is the scene. I hope it's to your liking, and as our August project. Materials, I recommend good quality watercolor paper. I'm using Saunders Waterford watercolor paper. This is cold pressed, 300 grams, 140 pounds, 15 inches by 11 inches. The paints I'm using are handmade professional grade paints from Mark Chapman in the UK. The colors, it's my normal palette. I'll describe those colors as I go through. Brushes wise, a good old mop brush. This is a Tintoretto. I should be able to do most of the painting with this because it holds a lot of paint and it's got a good edge and a good point to it. Hopefully there, as you can see, I might then, this is a synthetic brush, but quite soft, and then a slightly stiffer synthetic brush there, and then maybe a rigger, quite useful for doing lines and maybe in the road, cables, that sort of thing. All right, let me just see if there's any questions before we start. Don't think there is. Right. So, drawing first, get the right end of the pencil. Can't draw like that. Get the right end of the pencil and think about the perspective. I'm going to start from the left-hand side, getting in that line there a little bit, trying to get that correct, and then the street, and then I find that's easy to do. Get the top edge right of the building like this in a street scene. Get the bottom edge, and then work out things in between. The angles of all of these little roof coverings above the windows and doorways. So somewhere around there, I shall get in the top of that yellowish building at the end of the street, and then we've got the bridge going over the street, continue on down that right-hand side, and the pavement, the sidewalk going up the street is that sort of angle like that. Of course, it's obscured by that bus, so we can't exactly see where it goes, but I'm assuming it's going right up the hill there, with a slight gradient as well. So that's the pavement, a little bit wider here, narrower up the top. So now the edges of these different buildings, there's sort of looks like there's 4 buildings. There's a yellowish one, more of a sort of salmon, then this richer, warmer color here, and then we get to a more sort of faded look with this light pink on that left-hand side. So yellow building and that third building along, and then the light building on the left. Hopefully you can see those lines. I'll try and make them a little bit darker shortly so that you can see them. All right. Now, as I say, between top and the bottom, we've got all of these angular shadow shapes, and I'm not going to put them all in, but just get the essence of some of them, but really trying to get the lines right. There's get 1 or 2 in there. one in there. Still staying on this left-hand side, we've got the, as I say, I'm moving some of these doorways and windows around. So there's a doorway there, and get in another window there. Let's put another window up the top here. Right, this next building has only got a couple. Let's give it a few more. And this next building has got this sort of, these steps where there's sort of two kind of staircases that lead up to these buildings, one there, one there. So there's a doorway here, and these steps leading down. That's in the shade. And I guess there's another sort of staircase, steps on that side, but that's the steps leading to that doorway. Next building along, looks like there's two windows at the top. Two windows at the top. And then looks like a couple of doorways down the bottom, but we'll give them those angular shadows on those as well. As I say, just keep repeating these shadow shapes down the building. Now, yellow building. Let's put in, this one's actually got 3. Three windows across, or rather balconies. These are balconies. And then there are some doorways. Looks like there's a long window there, and then doorways. Just coming down to this kind of this elevated platform with the steps leading up to them. Over to the bridge, and it's almost horizontal at the top. And then the arch. Something like that. And then the far side of the arch and then the left-hand side, dark. All this is going to be dark. I'm doing a little bit of cross-hatching just to remind myself where those dark shadows will be, and shadow going across the road below the bridge. Just before I go to the right-hand side, the background. So let's imagine there's trees and large trees here, I think, maybe around the church, and then getting this tower, this bell tower, with the sort of steep dome. A little ball at the top and lots of details. An opening as well. Trees. And over then to the right-hand side, where we've got these, obviously the side of the building, but towards the top, there's those drainage pipes coming out from the top of the building, and also this light, the light silhouetted against the background. Let's pop that in. Again, it's something that we can move where we want to. So where will that, actually where it is looks pretty good. So top of the lights like that, and then the slightly angular sides. Maybe we'll introduce a few more silhouetted shapes against that bright sky on this right-hand side. So this right-hand side is going to be quite dark. Come down to the street level, and we've got the shadow created by the buildings on the right-hand side. Normally I don't draw in the edge of a shadow, but let's have it something like that. Not straight. Just think about the rooftop and create some interesting edges and shapes along that edge. Now, people. So look at the height of these figures and then find a sort of reference point, maybe where the arch of the bridge is, maybe the top of a window, a ground floor window, something like that as a reference point. And they're all going to be fairly level. Let's get in the guy I mentioned. But I'm just going to make up figures. Figure number one, then let's get in maybe a slightly larger figure walking up the street. And being in the shadows, we're not going to see too much really of their legs. For example, going back to the photo, look at this figure here. Yes, you can see the top of the figure because I think it's he got a sort of pinkish top, but particularly that right leg, you can hardly see it. It's sort of melting into the shadows right down the right-hand side. So maybe we'll have some figures, tops showing, but the bottoms of their the bottoms less so. A couple of figures there, perhaps coming towards us. So this one going away, maybe this one coming towards us. But all darkish figures silhouetted against a lighter background. And then on this right hand side, a little bit of perspective in that we can see, and I'm not going to really put this in the end painting too much, but just thinking about the perspective there. Of that, actually the bottom edge of the building is almost vertical, and there's the edge of the pavement here. The pavement has got some quite shiny cobbles or flat stones to it. Not sure if I'll put them in, but well, there's a little figure just lurking in there. Might be quite nice too. Quite nice to have that figure in. So that really is the composition and drawing done. And what I'm doing now is just double checking that I've included everything. Oh, we need that pole. That pole is going to be, now I don't want the pole landing right on top, right in the middle of a figure. Let's just have it slightly to one side. So maybe about there. So there's that pole, and the curve of the cable sort of comes down there and goes up. All right, so just get that angle right there. Bit of a curve at the bottom and then up, and all sorts of things happening at the top of that pole. There we are. And there's a few also, when you look at the photo, there's a few lines, finer lines going all over the place at the upper level of these buildings, cables going backwards and forwards. But we'll put those in with a little thin rigger later on. We've got these drainage pipes coming out of the buildings. Again, think about perspective, and they're almost horizontal, but the line of those pipes I think I might get in another. There isn't one there. Get in another angular window over there. Maybe one more down here. All right, so if you can imagine these angular shapes of the little cover above the window or the balcony door, and then creating that shadow, that kind of the sun beating down on that right hand side. Just double checking my drawing. Got this big doorway here. And just double check the base of the building is there, continues up the street, and then the edge of the pavement is something like that, comes out a little bit and goes up the street. And of course the sort of paver, the actual side of the pavement is that sort of thickness, again going narrower up the street. That is it, the drawing done for me. I'm not bothering, again on Pat Chat we discussed all this sort of greenery that you see in the balconies and the top of this building. It looks like there's a sort of long planter, maybe some kind of privacy for a roof terrace or something like that up there. Not bothering with that. There's the dark shadow underneath the sort of ledge that comes out from the top of the flat roof. We'll get that in as well. Not bothering with there's a bit of a light frame around some of these windows and doorways as well. Maybe we'll go in with a little bit of a lighter color later on to try and depict those. But I think that's it. I think that composition sort of works with the movement of the bell tower, the angle of the buildings and the perspective, getting in lots of windows, trying to get the character of all of these angular shapes, figures there. I'm loath to put a figure over here. I just think it looks nice. You'd expect most of the figures on a hot day to be walking in the shadows, maybe not over here on that side. They're here. And as I say, melting those figures into these shadows, really dark here, dark up that right-hand side, almost like a frame. We've got a frame down there on that right-hand side, and then a little bit of a frame with a shadow going across the foreground. Quite light here, light on this building here as well. So that is the drawing done. There will be obviously some windows and doorways on that right hand side, but not very noticeable. But not very noticeable because it will be quite dark in there. Let me just answer that question that's come in then. So Ollie, when drawing, can you rub out pencil marks after paint has been applied without damaging the applied paint? Quite difficult. You might be able to rub out some of the pencil work over a very light wash, but it's going to be pretty difficult going there, Ollie, I'm afraid. So don't put any strong pencil marks where there's going to be a light wash. For example, if it's a light shadow, the edge of a light shadow, the edge of the trees here as well. So I haven't gone in too heavy handed with those pencil lines there. So I hope that answers your question, Ollie. All right, let me then go on and let's start doing some painting. First wash then. Really covering, my thinking here is covering all of the paper with a light wash, and this wash will be the final color of the sky. These buildings on the left hand side and the road here as well. The rest of it, and the bridge. So I need to be thinking about the value and the color and how vibrant those colors will be. I'm going to try and push the colors a little bit, but we don't make these too bright. Otherwise, these are sort of in the middle ground, but we don't make them too bright. Otherwise, they're, of course, it might bring it a little bit too closer to us. So there's a fine balance there between getting that warmth, yet still pushing, getting the depth into the scene. and then cover this right hand side with something warm. So basically the stage covering the whole paper. Okay, starting with the sky, and the sky is going to be quite pale, quite light. I know it's like a light blue in the photo, but we'll keep it fairly light. So I'm using a little bit of cerulean blue. Let me describe my palette to you. So I've got neutral tint, burnt umber, burnt sienna, yellow ochre, spring green, viridian green, cobalt green, cerulean blue, cobalt blue, ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, cadmium red, light red, cadmium orange, cadmium yellow, bit of lavender, quinacridone gold, and a couple of gouache colours down there that I might use. Right, back to the sky. Stick with this cerulean colour. Keep it pale. Over slightly the edge of the buildings. All right, not much sky. Perhaps a little bit darker at the top there. And that's it. Now, buildings, starting with the yellow one, and then got a pinker one, and then red one, and then slightly lighter color. Let's start with the furthest one, that yellow, and trying to think what color this would be. So I'm thinking, out of my palette here, I'm thinking that's a little bit like a yellow, my cadmium yellow, with a little bit of yellow ochre. I'm thinking about a 50-50 mix of that. For this reddish building here, that's like a coolish red, alizarin crimson, and a little bit of cadmium red, I reckon, for that one. And then, well, maybe this summer one might have a little bit of more warmth in it, perhaps a little bit of an orange in it there. And then sort of that one is like a weaker one of this one, a weaker version of that. So let's start with this yellow one, still with my mop brush. This yellowish building, as I say, a little bit of yellow ochre, a little bit of yellow, and then lay down that color. And as it's still damp, you want to try and get the character of the building where you've got subtle variations in the values, the saturation of this yellow. So I'm just sort of stabbing the paper and just subtly maybe make it thicker mix, just really just stabbing the paper, trying to get that sort of variation in the values. That will dry lighter, paler, might look a little bit vicious now. They're moving along. We've got the salmon color. So I'm using this mixture and adding a bit of red to it, a bit of orange maybe. And gradually we'll get that sort of color. Bit of a soft edge between one and the other, which we've got in the image. Coming over, we've got the a lot darker, warmer sorry, a cooler red, a bit more red. Red, alizarin crimson. And then a weaker mix of that on this left-hand side. Quite light. And if I think I've gone too dark, I can just lift it off. Trying to get that feeling of the weathering of the building. It does get a little bit warmer over to the left-hand side. This colour does continue up the street here. Doesn't matter if you come down, bring that colour down into the street, because with the sunlight hitting that building, maybe that the reflection of those colours are going to be in that road surface being quite shiny and light. Cooler now as we come down into the ground. So I'm just now cooling it down with a bit of cerulean blue, cobalt blue into the road. There's my staircase. Cool road, and bring it over to the right-hand side. Maybe a little bit of that red in there. Perhaps a bit of that yellow in there as well. Continue with this coolish colour over to the right. There's a little bit of burnt sienna in there. This area will be covered with the dark shadow. Now, bridge, going over the road, which to me, from my palette, looks a little bit like a burnt sienna with a little bit of blue in it. Burnt sienna or burnt umber maybe. Get that curve right. And then over on the right-hand side, just any sort of warm colour to cover up. I'm using a bit of cad orange just to cover up that right-hand side. and blend in the colour of that building, the base colour of that building, into the road, sorry, into the pavement and a little bit of the road there. That is pretty much it. You can see how light that's drying already. You could do a little bit of splattering on that. On that surface while it's still damp. There's a bit of a bloom happening here. Don't mind that. Bit of a bloom there as well. I might just lift off this pavement while it's still quite light with this brush. So I'm dipping the brush in clean water and then squeezing it out, getting it fairly dry, which allows me to just lift off the surface and get that lighter colour back again. This row can be a little bit darker, actually. Going a bit more with the cerulean blue, cobalt blue, perhaps a little bit of burnt sienna. Timing is of the essence. If this is dry too much, you will get some nasty blooms appearing. But that is pretty much it for the base wash, covering most of the paper. I will be covering that in with this sort of cooler green, cooler blue for the background bell tower and trees. But that's pretty much it. Let me just answer any questions. Andrew, I'm not sure why your messages are not showing. Right, okay, don't think there's any questions then at this stage. Let me then go on to do the background. Next step, background, and then shadows of these windows and doorways on the left-hand side. A little bit of shadow in here because they're just not quite catching the light. Then I'm really going to work my way from left to right, getting the shadow of the bridge, shadow of the building on the right-hand side, bring the shadow across the road, and then drop in the people on top of that shadow. That's the plan. All right, so this background is going to be fairly cool. So cobalt blue, a little bit of this mix here. So not too cool. And then just the sort of silhouetted shape. There was a question earlier about the pencil lines. So you can just about see the pencil line there of the edge of the chapel. So I want to try and go over or go up to and go over that edge. There we are. And then a little bit of virgin green, a cool green, just to now create the covering of trees. I think I might need to go a bit darker. Ultramarine blue, virgin green. Think about the edge of the trees. Perhaps a little bit of spring green in there. Try and get a little bit of green foliage in those trees. Now I'm coming down to the top of the bridge, and there's a light edge to the top of the bridge. So we'll try and retain that little bit of a edge there. And then below the bridge now, it's actually quite light, so a bit of spring green and down to that wall. Going further up the road, virgin green, ultramarine blue, or too much blue. And a bit of a gap. There's a bit of a light area there, which is quite attractive. And some very distant trees, cypress trees, something like that, up the top. And that is it on that side. Okay. Right, next. Just check how dry this left-hand side is, because next I'm going to be doing the shadows, these very distinctive shadows here. When the shadows are dry, I'll go in with the darker colour for the doorways and the windows. All right, shadow colour. They're quite warm shadows, so let's mix something down here. A burnt sienna, ultramarine blue, bit of alizarin crimson. All right, let's get in the first shadow. Because I'm right-handed, I'll go left to right. Put this one here. That's the ledge, and then the shadow coming down. Next one down. Maybe this is a balcony, so we've got a little shadow coming from the balcony. The doorway down here. And there's a couple of windows in here. And a window here. Trying to get the character of the edge of those shadows as well. All right, next building along. Ledge, shadow. So with these shadow shapes, now you could do them with a little flat brush, but I've got trying to get the edge of my mop brush so that it helps me get that shape. There's a doorway here. And then next building along, the salmon. Now the windows are going to start getting a bit narrower. I need to think about that. And then yellow building. quite steep with those top windows. And they're sort of balconies, aren't they? Here we go. So they will dry a little bit lighter. The shadow on the walls, these walls are not as dark as those shadows. Let's get in that one there. So that wall there is fairly light. And above that, the side of the yellow building. Bit of dark shadow for the edge of the roof. That one, the salmon. Building, and then the darker building that isn't so dark anymore. There we go. There are these little pipes sticking out as well. In fact, I'll do those when that's dry, but we've got to put in these little pipes at the top there. All right. Now, does this church need a little bit of just a little bit of darkness on the left-hand side? Just a tiny bit. Still want to try and give the feeling of pushing that back. All right, bridge. Bit of a shadow underneath the top edge, and the shadow, the light on the right, casting an angular shadow across the side of the bridge, but I've got to make sure it sort of lines up with the shadow on the road. And then dark shadow underneath the bridge, the archway. So ultramarine blue, burnt sienna, bit of alizarin crimson, something quite dark, and hopefully I can still see the curve of the archway in my drawing. and then the far side of the arch. Down to the road and sort of angular shadow at the base where it hits the road, and sort of goes across like that over those figures, but those figures will be a little bit darker. All right. There's some dark shadow on the wall at the top of these stairs here. And a little bit there, a little bit there. The steps leading up to the doorway, they look well and truly weathered. There we go. Steps leading up to the doorway. These little bits of the paper I'm painting could be made into something. All right. Next then, let me just see if there's any questions. No? Okay, next. Dark. Go back to the source photo. Dark on this right-hand side, but quite warm. Orange, I reckon a little bit of cadmium orange and neutral tint, something warm and dark in there. But then the shadow gets a little bit cooler as we come across the road. Still, there's little speckles of warmth in there, but mainly I feel a little bit cooler here for the shadow going across the road, and this shady part of the buildings, warm, cad orange, something dark. In fact, let's start off with something dark first of all. So neutral tint, burnt umber, neutral tint, bit of burnt sienna, and these pipes coming out from the rooftop, sort of the side of the building. Just really getting in a sort of rough edge there, because there's lots going on, wires, extrusions coming out, lamps. And now go a little bit warmer with this cadmium orange. Cool it down a little bit in places, but mainly cadmium orange. Bring it down. And then down to the road. Thinking about that line there. And a bit vertical with the side of the building. Now, cool shadows. Cobalt blue. Cobalt blue and maybe a tiny bit of burnt sienna. And these shadows. Ultramarine blue, burnt sienna, quite dark in there. No, cobalt blue. Get this jagged edge of the shadow of the rooftop. So some subtle variations of cools and warms, but mainly on the cool side, which will create a nice bit of contrast with the warmth of the right-hand building. Let's go a little bit darker, picked up a bit of neutral tint, a little bit darker at the top here. Let's make these pipes stand out a little bit more, a little bit more. We're getting some windows and doorways in there shortly. Right, figures. These 4 figures here. Well, there is that little distant figure just in here. There we are. And then our main figure, or one of our main figures, quite dark. I'm sticking with this brush. Be careful not to smudge the bottom of my painting. So this figure, and then a larger figure closer to us. Maybe that one's looking at the shop. A little bit of a hat. I'll just bring that figure down into the shadows. And a little bit lighter for the two here. Get a better point on my brush. And now the road's going uphill, so that might be just a little bit higher than this figure here. Go a bit lighter. One figure. And another figure. And just try and merge them as best you can into the shadows, connecting them. Maybe we'll put on some flesh color on those in a minute. All right, next we want to add in some more definition to the windows and doorways on the left-hand side. Darker, thicker color to define those doorways. I'm gonna now use a smaller, stiffer brush, synthetic brush. This is like it's a number 12 round. Okay, let me just see if there's any questions. No, there isn't. Okay. All right, and we're doing these drain pipes as well on here. Right. Now, some of these entrances are balconies with railings. I might do those with a rigger brush later on. But let's get in these darker window openings, and there's a balcony here. Doorway. Window. Very dark. Door here. And then these windows here. doorways. They're going to be these are going to be balconies as well. So let's get the bottom of those in. Continue over. Now, not so dark on some of the further windows and doorways. Little pipes coming out again. Three there. Two there. Let's get in. Five in there. And a little bit of a shadow on that right hand side of the stairway, and darker side to the pavement. Go lighter, thinner, into the distance. This bridge has got some squarish bricks on it. Let's see if we can get that with a little flat brush, or I could use this brush with a certain edge to it, but I'll just use a little flat brush to try and create some darker bricks. Not too thick, not too thin, and just a few bricks. Must resist the temptation to put too much detail into that bell tower. Right. Rig a brush for some balcony railings. Pick up some of this darker colour and just on those upper balconies. Right, not every single rail. There's these ground floor windows have got balcony as well, or little railing on the front. There we go. These roads have got just a little bit of definition to them, with some gaps between the bricks in the road, the cobblestones. Just a few of those. All right, now the light on the right hand side. So the top of the light, thin sides, base and support. I'll glaze in the middle with a colour in a minute. Fairly dry brush now for some of the detail of windows and doorways on this right hand side, and as I say, not too much water on the brush, quite thick paint. And just picking up on a few major lines, the impression of something going on. So thin lines for these doorways in the distance, and then we'll make them a little bit thicker, wider spaced as we come down towards us. So this surface is still a little bit damp, and it's giving me a very subtle, soft edge. Might not be able to see it, but a bit of a soft edge to the edges. Okay, the pole is around about here. And now that cable coming down, shall I do that with this brush or a rigger? Let's choose the rigger. Plenty of paint on the rigger brush, and pressing down hard first of all to get a thicker line, and then I can just about see where it curves around. So there are these lines that go. In fact, there's another line there. The more you look, the more cables you see. But just a few of them. Back to my larger synthetic round brush, and let's get in a bit of definition too. Some of the stones. On that pavement there. Now, a little bit of flesh colour for some of these faces, and I'll use a smaller synthetic round for this. Some flesh colour, well, this light red or English oxide, maybe these two. This one. This one. I've got some, I might just put a little bit of lavender. We got a bit of a shiny, these stones here, got a very shiny surface to them. Maybe a bit of lavender might just give that sheen to some. I'll try it. So a little flat brush, like I was using for the bridge, little flat brush, some lavender. Well, you could use cerulean blue with a little bit of white for this, and just try it in a few places. Oh, maybe that gives a little bit of a shine to it. we go. Right. I think I'm nearly there. There just needs to be something going on up there. There's a sort of roof terrace thing going on up there. And a few more lines on the left-hand side for cables, or the shadow of the cables going across. Right, a little bit of white gouache in a few selected places, just to bring the sparkle back. Actually, before that, I just need to glaze this. Light. There we are. Right, rigger brush, which I was using for the darks. I need to thoroughly wash this now and get in some of these lights. I should actually just get some fresh. I've got some white gouache there, but it's a bit dirty. Let's just get some fresh stuff from the tube. So make sure my brush is as clean as I can. Actually, still. So dab brush, not too thick, not too thin, just somewhere in the middle. And maybe there's some of these tops here that got a little bit of light on them. And the tops of the drainage pipes coming out, they're just catching a little bit of light as well. These up here. All right, just a little bit of light here and there, and then maybe where these cables go across a darker background, they're catching a little bit of the light as well. And there's this light going there. Maybe a bit of light also on some of those pipes that are just coming out from that right-hand side. That is pretty much it. I could put some highlight on this figure here, but it's gonna, I mean, this figure's in the shade. It wouldn't really get too much highlighting. Just be careful not to add too much detail into the road. last light line. There we go. All right, well, there we are, Mexican Street, San Miguel in central Mexico, and trying to capture the colors of Mexico. Could have gone a bit darker, that one there, I reckon, but I think I've got the rest of them all right. Keep trying and get some structure, some texture into those walls. Don't make them too flat and monotonous. All right, with working at it while the surface still damp. Keep working at it, adding in thicker color, lifting off, trying to get those subtle variations. Maybe a bit of splattering. The splattering I did it too late, and you get that soft edge around it. If I'd have done it a little bit later, was a bit more patient, maybe I could have got more of an effect of that splattering on that side. Could have gone a bit darker with that one. But on the whole, capture that. The perspective, yeah, I'm pretty much there, I think. Trying to get the feeling of a bit of a slight gradient going up the hill. And then the sort of angle of all of these shadows going the right way. So fairly steep there, and then we're going a little bit more horizontal down to street level. Trying to get the archway right. The values were very important. Getting a feeling of depth as well. The light at the end of the street, the depth going through the tunnel to beyond, and the darkness down there on that left-hand side of the archway of the tunnel, down this bottom right corner as well. Trying to keep this right-hand side fairly vague and basic, just getting the feeling of that warm building there on that right-hand side, and maybe different shops and things on that side. And then a few figures to context the area, the scene and scale, a little bit more interest. So I did copy the figures in the scene. I often find, as I mentioned on Pat Chat, if I copy figures from a photo, they might end up being sort of fairly good figures, but to me they look fairly static. And sometimes when I make up figures with a bit of practice, you get a bit more movement in them and freshness to them. So keep them simple, particularly as they're in the shadows there. So thanks for watching, everyone, and I hope you enjoyed the demo.